Hey everyone, it's Mountain Finch time. I'm David Suddjian and welcome to Bird Bombs, helpful bursts of ID info. And I'm really excited for tonight's show because this is about some of my favorite birds. And not only that, this is the 12th edition, 12th episode of Bird Bombs that I've done since beginning last April. And so here's all the titles all arrayed with the dates that I've done the shows. And so it's really exciting to have been able to do this. And I've been really gratifying to hear that a lot of people have found them really interesting and helpful in their birding. But you know what? I'm especially want to say thank you to the photographers who have made Bird Bombs possible. A number of great local and not so local photographers have made their images specifically available for me to use. And without you guys and gals, I could not do Bird Bombs. So thank you so much. And I also want to thank our DFO host tonight, Jim Eston, who's been with me on most of the Bird Bombs, and also Laura Stedman, who is a ever popular DFO field trip leader, is been with me almost every time monitoring our questions and answers and helping to present those at the end. And tonight, indeed, use our Q&A and chat for any questions and comments, and we'll have some time for that at the end of our show tonight. So mountain finches are cool. And they've always been important for me because when in my first 30 years of my birding career in California, these are birds, the ones we're going to talk about tonight, are birds that I really didn't see around the area where I lived, either not at all or seldom or irregularly. We'd have some red crossbills, but everything else I'd have to pretty much go across the state up to the Sierra Nevada mountains, which I love to do. And I have an image here of the book by David Gaines, Birds of Yosemite and the Sierra and the East Slope. And this book was really helpful for me in really appreciating the finches when I go over to the mountains to encounter them. So he had this great phrase here about the Cassin's finch, that the Cassin's is the mountain finch par excellence. And that kind of gives me my inspiration for tonight. So mountains are excellent. I love mountains. Finches are excellent. And you put the two things together and you just can't hardly get any better than that. So it's really exciting. And so why mountain finches are cool, there's so many different reasons. One, of course, is yes, they are lovely. They are so beautiful to look at. Some finches are kind of plain, but a lot of the ones we'll see in our show tonight really are beautiful to look at. So take a look, for example, at this brown-capped Rosy-Finch here in the center of the view. This was 1 week ago today that this image was taken by Judy McKeon as we went up, and this was in Como in Park County. And look at this beautiful bird that she captured here. Look at these pink tones. I mean, this is something that you don't get in all the birds, right? You don't get a lot of pink birds. So that in itself is really special. Take a look at these tail feathers. Look at the unusual and interesting shape. They're very narrow on one side of the shaft and very broad on the other. And on this closed tail, you get this fork tail impression and this very interesting shape. Notice the pink extending down onto the undertail coverts and this beautiful pattern of dark centers on these big feathers here. Oh, isn't that a gorgeous bird? So yes, they are lovely, and that's partly why they're so cool. They also are environmental extremists or extreme environmentalists. So these are birds that encounter some of the most harsh and difficult and challenging conditions in the areas where they live, and they thrive in those settings. And because they are in those difficult settings, sometimes they're also among some of the most least studied among our breeding birds that we have all the time. The black Rosy-Finch featured here is particularly poorly known. If you look in the Birds of North America species account for black Rosy-Finch, you'll see lots of little information, no information, poorly known in different sections there. So another great thing about mountain finches is they flock. Yeah, you know, we get you know, single bird here or there, but a lot of times you have several together or even dozens or hundreds of birds. So it's wonderful to encounter them in flocks. They also have fascinating ecological relationships. We can think about red crossbills with their connections to different kinds of pines, and the red crossbill, how they move so unpredictably and eruptively and dramatically. That's one of the awesome things about mountain finches. And then you have some that are just more rarely encountered, so that every time you encounter them, it's like a special treat, such as the pine grosbeak. Everyone loves this one. They have amazing beaks, bills. Which is it? Beaks, bills? I'm not sure. So grosbeak, does a grosbeak have a bill or a beak? So they have these great bills adapted to what they do, and they visit our yard. So that's super exciting when we see these birds that are, so characteristic of the Colorado mountains appearing down in our lowland yards, or even if we're up in the mountains, it's exciting to see them when they visit our yards. So tonight we're talking about the family Fringillidae. So these are the Fringiline and Carduline finches and allies. So it's actually a pretty big family worldwide with 231 species. There's 3 main groups in the family. One of them is something we don't think about when we think about mountain finches, and that's the Hawaiian honeycreeper group, which is actually quite a large number of birds that are in the Fringillidae are in the Hawaiian honeycreeper subfamily. And then there's a lot of them are in the old world in the Fringillidae. But here in the US, we have a lesser number. In Colorado, there are 18 different species of Fringillids that have been recorded. And here's our focal species for tonight. We have 7 different species that we're going to focus on. There are other species that are in the Fringillidae that we could consider as mountain finches, such as the pine siskin, but we're going to leave that for another time, maybe when we consider the goldfinches and such. So these are our focal species. Notice we've got a few different groupings here. We've got the evening grosbeak in this genus Calcothrastes, and the pine grosbeak in its own genus here on our list of Pinicola. And then we have 3 species together, the leucosticte Rosy-Finches, and then Cassin's finch. We have other finches we know about that are in the Fringillid family, such as the house finch and the purple finch, and we'll touch on those a little bit, and the crossbills in the genus Loxia. Of course, there's a couple other crossbills that occur in Colorado besides the red crossbill, or maybe there's lots of different crossbills that occur in Colorado yet to be formally recognized as such. And let's just note here that I have evening grosbeak on the list here, and it says Fringillid, but there are other things we call grosbeaks that are not in the Fringillidae, and such as the black-headed grosbeak and blue grosbeak are examples of grosbeaks that are not in the same family as the evening grosbeak. And I'll just note that we're talking tonight about mountain finches. There are really in the world some things that are formally called mountain finches. There's 3 species of birds in the tanager family that are called mountain finches in South America. And there are 2 other species in the same genus as our Rosy-Finches that have the name mountain finch, the plain mountain finch and the black-headed mountain finch, and they're both occurring in Asia. So tonight, we're going to focus a little bit more on the winter time than in the breeding season. Won't speak a lot about nesting habits and things like that. We'll focus on our winter time. All right. So here I've color-coded it for you to help you sort it out. You got the yellow one, you got the pink ones, you got the red ones, and you got the kind of pinky red one. All right, so the color coding will help us get there. So mountain finches 101. First off, it's really about the bills. Finches are seed eaters and conifers are a specialty, and so they have these great conical bills adapted for cracking open seeds. They eat other things too, and like buds, needles, newly forming needles on the pines and other conifers, but also fruit can be a really important part of the diet for some of these. And think about evening grosbeak in particular in that regard. So the bills are specially adapted to the main thing they're doing, which is eating seeds. So the mountain finches reside in the mountains of Colorado. Well, if you want to find them, you pretty much want to go up into mountain territories. But most of these species we're talking about also occur at times below the mountains, down, say, along in the metro area and other areas in the lowlands, even prairie-ward and out westward of the main mountain areas in Colorado. Here's a map showing some different forest type designations. We won't worry about that, but it pretty well delineates where the main mountain regions are that our mountain finches take advantage of. Notice the red colored areas along the margins here. These are areas dominated by ponderosa pine. This is a really important forest type for some of the mountain finches that we're talking about today. So we can kind of see where those are distributed. All right, so if you want to enjoy finches, you want to keep looking up, because one of the characteristics of finches is that the birds of the forest canopy or open areas, and they tend to fly up above the trees or above the landscape, sort of high up with their typical undulating flock. They're going to be in flocks and calling. All right, so that's an important point. Finches flush up when you disturb them, and they go to perch on top of something. They don't go and hide down in the grasses like sparrows might, for example, or maybe in the shrubs, but they kind of make themselves visible if they don't take off entirely and go away. And so when you're looking for finches, you want to look for them at the tops of trees, often the tops of things, out on the ends of higher branches. When I hear Cassin's finches out in front of my house every day now, and I step out, I know where to look on tops of the big trees that are around, and that's the places where I'm going to find them. So that kind of helps. Well, pro tip here, find and identify the finches by their calls and songs. Now, by its nature tonight, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the vocalizations, but it's really important to spend some time listening and learning. Finches call a lot when they fly and when they're perched, and so that can really help you to cue into them in the first place and to identify them. All right, so they do like to wander. Our species, though prone to wanderings, are not migratory in the sense of predictable annual flights from one place to another, but they vary dramatically from year to year. And so we can think about regular migrations like robins and things coming north in the spring and south in the fall and all of that. Finches move around too, but not in the same seasonal patterns with the same regularity as some of the others. But there are some patterns that we can discern. And these changes happen because of food supply, both food supply elsewhere and food supply here in Colorado. So poor supplies elsewhere might bring birds to Colorado, and good supplies here are going to bring them in and keep them here. All right. So as we think about finches, we can remember that males and females are generally similar in most of the species. She tends to be duller in the ones we're talking about tonight, or not red. And females average a little smaller. And some of these species show some color variation among sexes, like the male red crossbill can be red or even greenish or in between. In juveniles of these birds, a lot of them in some of the species look like the females until they get to be 2 years old. So when we talk about things like Cassin's finch, sometimes we're looking at birds that look like females at this time of year, but they're really young males. And that will continue for another year and a half, if you will. All right, so let's do a little case study of an eruption, because an eruption is kind of one of the awesome things about mountain finches. Not all the species, but some of them characteristically become much more numerous than in other years when they erupt from one area into a different part of their range. And hopefully that includes us here in Colorado, but really for the most eruptive species, it happens less often than it does more often. So more years are off years than on years, if you will. And again, they erupt in responses to food resources. So let's do a little case study of a red crossbill here from the years 2013 to 2017. This is my first 5 years or so in Colorado. And I'm focusing here on the Front Range and central and northern mountain counties. And we see in the first year represented here, 2013, which is in the blue line, things kind of tripped along at a low level through the year. But then something happened in July of 2014. Numbers increased dramatically, and they stayed high rather, all the way through the winter into 2015, into the beginning of summer. They dropped off back to that same lower level. So here's an eruption that began in the summer of 2014, ended after spring 2015, lasting not quite a year. And so over this 5-year window, we can see that red crossbills were actually in high numbers only about a quarter of the time. So that's kind of a picture of one eruption. That can be a kind of pattern we see. Sometimes it's just a more shorter seasonal type eruption. Like this past summer, we had something that really only lasted during the summertime as birds seem to move through the area. So let's move on to our first focal group, and that'll be the Rosy-Finches. And we can consider some things together about them since they're all closely related and they have a lot of commonalities in how they live. These are true mountain finches. These guys, there's no peak too high, no peak too rugged or too exposed for Rosy-Finches, extreme environmentalists. And so they go where the food is at. And so they like to forage in open country, and sometimes their foraging habitat's not available, as we'll see in just a moment. But they're looking for rocky hillsides, meadows, shrublands, roadsides, open areas in towns. Key element is usually some bare ground and some food of some kind. All right, and so flocks land on the ground, on rooftops, trees, bushes, fences, power lines. They kind of drape all over the place, and they congregate at this time of year at feeders when snow covers food or natural resources are scarce. So notice on the image at the top center, you can see some kind of grayish areas on that mountain slope. These are areas where the winds had just blasted away the snow that had been deposited there only days before. And so now the rosy finches can go up and forage in those areas on the rocks. So during the winter, the snow forces them down somewhat, but when the habitat opens up, they move upward to take advantage of the tundra and ridges that are now free of snow. Rosies generally prefer to be at the highest altitudes where food can be found, but at this time of year, we do look for them at feeders in lower areas as well. Now, the summertime is a little different. They're only up high, and they are the rosy finches as a group nest higher than any other group of birds in North America north of the Mexican border. So they're way up there, and they choose cliffs overlooking glaciers and snowfields up on the highest peaks and forage along the edge of those retreating snowfields and snow patches, like you see the bird on the lower right. Notice its bill is dark colored, by the way. That's something we see in the breeding season for rosy finches. All right, so now we'll get a little deeper here. Let's take a look at the distribution of these three species of rosy finches. It's very interesting. They don't overlap during the breeding season. They kind of range from up in Alaska down for the gray-crowned rosy finch, down southeastward to the southern Rockies for the brown-capped rosy finch. And over that distribution for the three species, they all have different areas that they occur in. The gray-crowned rosy finch occurs all the way from the islands out in western Alaska, all the way down as a breeding bird into Montana and even the northern edge of California. So a very big breeding range compared to our others. And then, as you can see, the gray crown in the winter in this image down the lower left from eBird just a few minutes ago is showing us where their records here right in the Denver area. Here's Denver. And we can see that there are a number of points down here in the flats, in the lowlands. And so the rosy finches are moving down into this area adjacent to the mountains during this time of year. You won't find them there during the breeding season, of course, the gray crown being entirely gone. You can see from the red dots on this map that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rosy finch action happening right now in our area. We'll touch on that a little later. So the gray crown from this big breeding range to the black, see these little orange patches in here? That's where it breeds. It's just breeding on isolated mountain ranges in these different areas, or where the mountains are sufficiently high, from Montana and Idaho down in through Utah and Nevada, and a few others here, a lot in Wyoming and so on. So basically Great Basin, this region of the Rocky Mountains. And then we can shift over from the black, which is among the least known of our rosy finches, to the brown-capped rosy finch, which it says here is nearly endemic to Colorado. That means it doesn't really occur anywhere else, hardly. I say nearly, because it does actually reach up a little bit into Wyoming. Here's a breeding dot up here in the Snowy Mountains, and at a few places down here in New Mexico a little bit. But most of all of the breeding range of the brown-capped rosy finch is limited here to Colorado. So we can call this Colorado's own high country bird. So let's take a look at the graphs here, understand a little bit more about how these birds occur through the course of the year. And we'll look at the frequency, and we see that a couple things show up right away. For one of these species is here year-round. That's our green line, the brown-capped rosy finch. That's the resident, that is our own high country bird. And the other two species are only here during basically arriving late fall and staying into the beginning part of spring, and then going back to their breeding ranges. So that's one thing. And we see the gray crown on average, according to eBird, for a statewide look, is seen more frequently. You encounter it more often than the other two species. But when it's found, the brown capped is on average more numerous than the gray-crowned, and the black is the least numerous. All right. So what do you think's going on with this weird summer peak? I'm going to go real brief here, but I just think this is really interesting. Notice the green line for the brown-capped rosy-finch frequency. This is a bird that's pretty much limited to Colorado. So let's just say that's where nearly all of them are. And after the winter, the line drops here in the beginning of spring to this ebb. Where did they go? And then the frequency increases again during the summer, and then it drops again at the end of summertime. Where did these brown-capped rosy finches go? Well, they don't have anywhere else to go. What I think is going on is during this time, at the end of April or so, they have left the feeders and things that have moved back up to the mountain peaks, even though, or at areas that are higher than where birders are looking, even though they might not be able to breed there yet, but they're ready to when the conditions become amenable to that. And then birders detect them again during the breeding season. And in the fall, again, those peaks and high areas become inaccessible or less visited. And I think that's what's going on with that weird distribution for the brown-capped rosy-finch. All right, so the gray-crowned rosy-finch is the first. We'll look at a little bit of detail. Got some summary of rosy-finch basics above there. One of the things to realize is that they have pink on them, and so that's a little different. As we look at our gray-crowned rosy-finch, let's notice that there's two different forms that visit Colorado. There's one called the gray-crowned form in eBird. It actually includes 3 different subspecies, and we can think of that as the brown-cheeked form. I think it's a little more helpful. Since the species is called gray-crowned, then it's kind of confusing to also have a form called that, and they both have gray in the crowns, right? So the other one is the Hepburn swarm, and it has a lot more gray on the face. Look, the cheek is gray, and the auricular area back here. So all gray, basically all over the face. And so that one is the Hepburn's form. We can think about that one as the gray-cheeked. They have different distributions. We won't get into that right now. The gray-crowned rosy-finch has this kind of milk chocolate brown color, and it's pink on the belly, but there's not a whole lot of other pink prominent on it. It has pink on the wings, and we could see some on the tail if we could see enough of it, but it's not really as prominent as on some other species. And notice there is, of course, this black forecrown and the gray hind crown. And we talked about the different amounts of gray on the face with the 2 different forms. And in rosy finches in general, the females are similar, but they're drabber than the males. And so here's an example, probably on the upper right, of a female, a little drabber even than the male behind him. You can see his body is much more richly brown colored. So we can look above here and just on the upper left, and we see I put some H's up near the ones that are the Hepburns, and most of the rest of the others are gold gray-crowned. Just highlight a few of those. You can appreciate the differences in particular on that slide. And we can compare with the other species, but we'll just wait till we get to the other species to do that. But I've got some details here you can look at on the video afterward. All right, here's a beautiful image of one with its wings open. Rosy finches are distinctive in having silvery underwings that you can really see when they come gliding out of the sky. Notice the extensive brown on the underparts of this gray-crowned rosy finch, but it's kind of a deeper, kind of a rich milk chocolate brown, not blackish, not too warm colored, but really a beautiful color. The pink kind of limited on the belly there, so showing real nicely in that picture. So now let's look at the black rosy finch. This one is, I think, the most beautiful of these 3 beautiful birds. Tough to say which, but take a look at this male up here at the top near the center, and look at his beautiful dark plumage, which looks blackish, but it really is comes out looking that way in bright conditions like out in the snow and all that. And when you look at them close up, as you can discern even here, it really is more brown colored. They have they're the darkest though of our rosy finches, more of a dark chocolate than the milk chocolate, and have a lot of pink. So pink is very prominent, and the crown looks similar to the gray-crowned rosy finch, not quite exactly the same pattern, but really very similar. And again, these sexes are similar, but the females are drabber. So on the lower right over here, there's maybe immature female or a female, and probably this bird in the image here on the left in the nice white on the snow is more a female, like a little paler So notice on the black rosy finch that there's black below the eye, not brown, has black on the body, and pink is prominent on the posterior regions of the bird. And so we can compare with the gray crowned. It was a lighter, browner bodied bird with the pink less prominent, and the brown or gray below the eye, not black. And with the brown capped, we'll see in a moment. So we'll look at these birds on the roof, and you can see that a couple of them at least look a little different. They all pretty much have gray in the crown, so that's not helping us, but we can look at the body coloration and see that two of them are kind of blackish gray, and that those two also are blackish or maybe gray blackish below the eye, and definitely not brown. So we've got a couple black rosy finches there in the middle among some gray crowns. And on this image, this one's a little tricky. Now, we haven't learned yet here in Bird Bombs about the brown cap rosy finch, but I think we might have all three species in this image. You definitely see this nice male black, no doubt about that. This one, I think, is a female brown cap that we haven't learned about yet. We'll come back to that. And this might be an immature gray crown back here with enough gray to catch our eye. So let's go forward and look at the beautiful brown cap rosy finch. Look at this lovely bird, Colorado's own high country bird. I love these two images on the left by Judy from last week, a male on the left and then a female to his right. And they were perching on the wires together. And you can see how she is drabber and doesn't have the same lovely color tints as he does, but she's still a very pretty bird. So the brown capped is distinguished by having brown below the eye. All right, so not black like on the black cap. That doesn't help us with the gray crowned form of the gray crowned rosy finch. And it has a lighter brown body color. So it's not as dark as the gray crown. And the pink extends higher up on the underparts. Remember on that gray crown, the pink was only coming up in the lower part of the belly, but on this male brown cap extending way up towards the lower part of the breast. And one of the distinctive things that you want to look for is they have a scaly pattern on the crown. And that is this darker forecrown going back to a paler hind crown. Each of these feathers is fringed with paler edges, so they look a little lighter. All right, so the brown capped is more difference between the sexes than the other two. And we've kind of gone through some of these main parts. So we'll kind of leave that go. And here's a neat comparison with the gray crown rosy finch on the left. Notice the scaly pattern on the crown of this brown capped on the right is different than the gray crown, and that gray is not prominent on the head of the brown capped. All right, and then in this group we have looks like some brown cap rosy finches here without any gray prominent on the head amongst some gray crowned rosy finches. All right, so before we leave the rosy finches behind, we have to pay a little attention to this near endemic that we have breeding along the spine of Colorado. On this image on the left, you can see the orange areas are all the high mountain spots where the brown cap rosy finch is nesting from the front range up here, a little bit up into the Snowy Mountains front range, coming down along the Sawatch range, for example, the San Juans, Sangre de Cristos, Culebra range, into the Sangre de Cristos in New Mexico. And a little star here in the Mosquito range, because the brown cap rosy finch was first nest known to science was discovered on July 11th in 1915 by Frederick C. Lincoln. It was found in a rock cavity on a cliff. You can see that cliff right in the background of this picture here, near the summit of 14er Mount Bross in Park County. Here we've got some DFO field trippers walking along, careful not to trip on anything as they go. And that very same spot is in the background in this picture. Of course, we were up there looking for the white-tailed ptarmigan, which we saw wonderfully. And the brown cap rosy finch doesn't have a whole lot of bird friends during its breeding time. There's not a whole lot else up there where it is. The ptarmigan's one thing, the American pipit, and of course the white crowned sparrow gets right up to the edge of where the brown cap rosy finch likes to be in its area there above timberline. So here I put for you here the some of the article there from the AUK, which somebody can come back in the video and read that if you want. But you can see the cliffs where the nest was located in the right-hand image from the article, and the nest itself, rather elaborate construction that was wedded into the rocks in some fashion similar to the picture in the lower right. All right, so let's move forward to something that is really not an ID challenge. Gorgeous birds, the evening grosbeak. Everybody's always excited to see evening grosbeaks, no matter how much you look at them. They're big, they're bold, they're flashy, they're noisy, and they're often in numbers. Notice it's a bird that's distributed across Canada, has a pretty good northern distribution, and reaches down as a breeding bird year-round into just a few areas in the western part of the US. And here in Colorado, on this map from Birds of the World, they actually indicated as scarce in the breeding range, which is kind of interesting. And we can see that its distribution is kind of present year-round with some variation from year to year as to how many, sometimes an odd peak. I remember that peak that happened there in September, October of 2020. Some of the data that I contributed made that peak there on the eBird graph, so that's always kind of cool. This is a big finch. We don't need to go a whole lot into the ID. It's pretty straightforward. We can notice the bold pattern of white on the wings. It's very evident in flight. And of course, the huge bill. They have distinctive calls that they give, which is usually how I find evening grosbeaks, is that I hear the call, and that gets me cued into where they are. So their plumages look the same through the year, except during molting time, they can look a little more ratty, or the young birds may be molting to more adult type plumage. The males with these distinctive colors of yellow and kind of ashy, sooty gray, and the female is much paler, kind of an odd sort of unique kind of grayish coloration. And the juveniles look like the females once they molt in the early fall. So I would see a couple other friends in the background, pygmy nuthatch at that feeder on the left, and pine siskin in the middle. All right, another one that really isn't all that challenging to ID compared to some things, but can be a little tricky if you don't see it well, is the pine grosbeak. I love the specific epithet there, enucleator, Pinacola enucleator. I think this essentially means to take the seed away, and that's what these guys do. They have, they're mostly a high mountain finch. You see in their distribution that they really don't range out onto the prairie, except very rarely. And really they stick up high above 9,500 feet and favoring spruce fir forests up there. And then they come also to feeders and feed along roadsides. And we see these guys mostly in small numbers. So the pine grosbeak has that very interesting distribution, much like the brown cap Rosy-Finch. And I think it's because it spends so much time at higher elevations where birders are less frequent until the snows open up. And then again, when the snows shut things down in the fall, until the pine grosbeaks move a little bit more to where people are personal, is what I think is going on. It doesn't seem to be, I'm not so clear if there's a movement into Colorado of pine grosbeaks from elsewhere clearly or not. The Colorado breeding range is a little disjunct from other parts of the species breeding range. Maybe somebody can inform me on that part. So this is a bird that's kind of big and plump. It has this distinctively small head and a curved culmen. The edge of the upper mandible is curved. That's the culmen there. 2 white wing bars. That's stubby bill. The male is a very distinctive coloration with this pink to carmine red color. Notice the flanks are often not all the way red, but are gray to varying degrees. Sometimes the red is more limited to the head area. Eastern forms of the pine grosbeak have more extensive red in the flank area there. One of the distinctive things that always catches my eye, though, in addition to the shape features, is this big broad crescent below the eye. It shows up on both sexes and even on this very drab bird here. And so that's something to be looking for as an eye catcher. These guys are with some pine siskins. All right, so Cassin's finch, the mountain finch par excellence. So this one we can think about in the context of the purple and the house finch. But this is the mountain version and the one that we have frequently in the mountains here in Colorado. You see it's got a pretty big western distribution. But if you look more closely here, instead of all this big purple blob that doesn't say a whole lot, you can see that it actually is distributed according to where the mountains are, being a mountain finch par excellence. So that's why this map looks all kind of stippled and everything. These are basically where the mountain ranges are that are supporting the forests that the Cassin's finch is after. Notice along the front range, very strong winter presence of Cassin's finch relative to some other parts in Colorado. For example, if you compare over, say, in the Salida area, they're on average, they're not as well represented as they are on average in the front range. And I think that's the case right now, where we have a lot here now and not so many over there. So the Cassin's is bigger than the house finch, and it is more crisply marked and it's brighter, has longer wings, more deeply notched tail. You notice the bill is distinctively kind of triangular and pointy with a straight culmen, okay, that upper edge of the mandible, upper mandible, and it's kind of cresty looking and or peaked on the crown. Prominent on the face are white eye arcs, or sometimes you get the impression of an eye ring, but sometimes more like eye arcs is a very important mark for the Cassin's finch. And they have a face pattern. There's something there. There's a contrasting pattern with a pale supercilium and malar and a brown auricular patch. But now we'll forget about this frequency map for now. We'll go here to talk about where some of these parts are if you're not familiar. So the supercilium, of course, is this pale line coming back above and behind the eye. Auricular patch, in this case, brown contrasting patch of feathers in the ear area / cheek area. And the malar, pale line, in this case, coming down from the lower mandible down across the lower part of the cheek. And so it creates a distinctive pattern for the Cassin's finch. And then the culmen is this ridge along the upper edge of the bill. So look at the face pattern on these different Cassins that we can see here. Notice what stands out to me is this very pale or prominent kind of area on the malar, which is the most eye-catching part for me on all of these birds. And it really shows up when I look out the back window on the deck feeder and I see these birds. I catch that face pattern, I catch that prominent pale area on the malar, and I know right away I need to look more closely at that. It'll be the Cassin's finch. All right, so a few more parts we want to worry about. The tail, of course, we all know what the tail is, right? But the undertail coverts, these feathers coming underneath the tail, are important for the Cassin's finch because they have markings on them. See those little streaks there are an important ID feature. We'll see the flanks and the sides. All right, so on the male is kind of pink, and he has that contrasting face pattern, kind of washed with pink, with pinky red, and he's generally unstreaked underneath. Notice though that there are some little flecks down on the undertail covert area, even on the male. And you can see on the lower right-hand image those flecks. He's unstreaked otherwise, but that's an important mark for thinking about with the purple finch. All right, and so the female and young birds are very crisply streaked, and they also have that contrasting face pattern. So we can compare finches here a little bit, and we see the house finch, our first thing to compare. And just briefly, notice the rounded culmen. They don't have a crusty look. They're not as clean underneath. They're more orangey often than pink, or a red that's not pink. And the red is boldest on different parts of the face. One of the things I didn't point out on the Cassin's pictures above, but we can see here on this slide in the upper right, is the red is boldest on the front part of the crown. And then the back part of the crown is not red, and it has a contrasting color. We don't see that so much with the purple finch at all, and the house finch just has a different color pattern there, and the females are much drabber without the bold face pattern of the Cassin's finch. All right, see a little bit of a hint of a face pattern here, but look, no eye arcs or eye ring, no cresty look, and pretty different. Purple finch is rare for us. The male is basically washed in reddish more pervasively than on the Cassin's finch, red extending to the nape, so not that capped look. The female can be an ID challenge. Her streaks are a little bolder not quite as sharp sometimes. She doesn't have the eye ringed or eye arc look. And on her undertail coverts, which you can't see on this bird too well, they would be clean without any markings. Right, I like this little image here comparing the bill shapes in particular, face patterns too, but look at the bill shapes of the Cassins, our pointy billed one with the straight culmen and the other two with the curves there. So red crossbill is the last of the species we're going to consider, and it is one of the most fascinating because this species is made up of a number of different things that we could call subspecies, but we call them in crossbills call types or ecotypes. And these are certain populations of birds that have distinctive vocalizations. And each type seems to be associated, if not adapted to, particular kinds of conifer species that occur in their main area of occurrence. And so, for example, the red crossbill here in Colorado has some primary associations with ponderosa pine, lodgepole pine, and some of the other pines as well, but those are two of the principal ones. So, but is it one crossbill or is it many? Indeed, there are a number of different types of red crossbills that have been recorded in Colorado. Two that are prominent are the type 2 and the type 5. And these identifications are made principally on, or really confirmed only by particular vocalizations. And then there are a number of other types that have been recorded rarely, some of them not quite so rare, like this type 4 Douglas fir, one of them with only one record in eBird, the Appalachian type of the crossbill. I love this one, the type 7, the enigmatic crossbill, for which there are 3 confirmed reports. And the important thing to realize, here's a couple other ones that could occur in Colorado, don't occur too far away. Important thing to realize is that these identifications are made based on the shape of the image of the call. Particular calls, flight calls, contact calls, sometimes they're called. And these are things that sometimes you can discern readily with your ear, but sometimes you need to look at the sonogram to actually confirm the identification, or you could try relying on Merlin, and that can work pretty well. But some of these rarer types, their presence in Colorado has really been confirmed by experts that Cornell has that review recordings of Colorado of crossbills to confirm what types might be there. So that's the case for the enigmatic crossbill. I probably heard lots of enigmatic crossbills and didn't even know it. So there are some rare bills that we need to worry about, of course. Not worry too hard, at least for this case, the white-winged crossbill. Always keep a mind open to their possible reality. They're rare generally in Colorado, and there aren't many around, especially in recent decades. The other that's making the news lately is the cassia crossbill. I'm not going to go into this here at all tonight, except to say that they're being found possibly more than we expected over the last year here, especially. And so that's something to be aware of as well. And again, in these cases, if you're encountering crossbills, you want to make and submit a recording to confirm the identification. In eBird, you can only report them to the types, much less these rare species, if you have a recording to support it. So the crossbill, you can see, is pretty much a mountain bird like the others in this map up on the left, but that it also occurs kind of all over the place out on the prairie. It's because they wander around a lot. So this is a medium-sized finch. It's got a characteristic shape of kind of a bull head with a big bill and kind of a chunky body. And of course, the bill is distinctive and diagnostic. Crossbills have the mandibles crossed over. All the different kinds of crossbills do. And they have a distinctive call that they give in flight. And I just put kip, kip, kip here. And don't get fooled by thinking if you hear, kip, 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 it's one kind and kip, kip is another kind. It's more the cadence and character of the call, the sharpness, the staccato quality, the way it's often in threes where it varies with ones and twos, that kind of thing. And it's distinctive for red crossbill, but that sort of thing is not distinctive among the different types of red crossbills that you might hear. There you kind of get into the nature of the call itself. So one of the things I really like on the red crossbill is that we get to enjoy the juvenile birds. And these birds are nesting in our mountains, but some of the young ones we see may be coming to us from somewhere else. But the juveniles look quite different. They're all streaked underneath, but of course they have that same shape and they have the same crossed bill, a little bit of a face pattern there. And take a look at the beautiful undertail coverts on this female red crossbill, these beautiful black kind of splotches there, very distinctive pattern. You can see it again on this one on top of the cones here down in the lower right. Neat little pattern that you might not notice if you're not watching for it when you're out in the field and you have those opportunities. All right, so now speaking of that, it's let's see what we can do. It's quiz time here on bird bombs, and let's see what you've learned and what you can remember and what you already knew. So take a look at all these tails. We've got 7 tails, and they're telling us a tail. And what can we tell? Well, I see right away that some of these birds have pink. All right, I see a pink wash here, and we see some pink here, and we see some pink kind of all over the place here. So that's going to help us right away with those 3. And what else can we discern? We see that interesting tail shape that I was pointing out earlier. So let's go right to the chase with those. And we can say these are going to be, with that pink, some of the Rosy-Finches. And the one that it's kind of hard to tell what's what. We can go with the black Rosy-Finch here because of the kind of darkness here and the very extensiveness of the pink there. It's a little harder to discern what we have in the differences between these 2 species. But we see that what can we say? Let's just go with what they are here. Whoops, I'm going to go back again. Got a 3 brown capped on number 1, and the gray crowned is number 3. Looking in this particular view, very similar to the brown cap. Looks a little more extensively pink, but that's just because we can see that part, right? And the black Rosy-Finch, number 7, down on the right. So up on the upper right is something that's differently colored, and the yellow, of course, gives it right away, being Grosbeak. Then we've got 2 grayish ones on the bottom. Notice the undertail pattern, the undertail covert pattern is different, with markings on this undertail coverts and plain on this one. This one looks like a bigger bird, is my sense of it, with a longer tail. And we can go, of course, with, oops, I forgot, I skipped right that. I'm blowing on this one, guys, but there's the red crossbill with those beautiful black spots I mentioned. And going here to number 5 and 6, what do you think? We've got Cassin's finch with the undertail coverts mark and pine Grosbeak. All right, trying to get ahead of myself. Everything's coming up rosy now because we've got Rosy-Finches at the feeder. So let's consider image number 1 here. We've got 3 finches. What do you think we have? One looks kind of easy. We've got A, B, and C. So A, I think, is pretty easy, right? By the blackish coloration and black below the eye and prominent pink on the wing. What do you think about B? Not very much gray prominent there on the crown at all. And we see a lot of pink underneath, but generally kind of a paler brown. So we can kind of think, what do you think towards that one? And C in the back with gray prominent. Yes, we have a black at A, and the B is the brown capped here without the gray prominent, and the gray crowned Rosy-Finch in the back. How about image number 2 down below? We have a number of birds here. So when you're looking, you want to kind of look for something different. It can get confusing as they're all moving around. Their heads are bobbing up and down. A lot of gray going on in these heads. But mostly, let's see. I see one that looks darker. Okay, so I see that there's one here among, we'll just highlight a few of them. And we see that bird F is darker than the others in this image. Some of the ones in the far left, lower left might be dark also. And then we have D and E. They both have gray prominent up in the crown, but they have brown below the eye here and gray extensive on the face. So that's not too hard. Gray crown form D, gray crown Hepburns E, and the black. All right, so now we're still looking at feeders because that's where we find these mountain finches this time of year. And here we see some familiar looking orangey birds and some other browner birds there with them. And we see some face patterns going on. And we see some nice crisp streaking on the back of some of these guys. Uh-oh, I see some eye arcs, eye ring, a little bit of white above the bill. What can we say about these guys? Yep, we've got 2 Cassin's finches here, female immature types that are among some house finches. So, you know, when you're looking, that pattern face is going to catch your eye with those. All right, so what do you think here? Now we're switched to a different feeder. One thing I can tell about these birds is that these are messy eaters. They've all got seed all over the place. They need to take care of that. So we can't even do a whole lot with the bill here. There's so many seed fragments, but right away we can see the beautiful pink tones on this left-hand bird and the one in the middle with the nice crisp streaks. Look at the undertail coverts. I see a few markings all the way down there, nice face pattern, eye arcs or eye ring prominent. And so that's going to take us, we know, to Cassin's finch. What about this bird on the right, though? What do you think? What can you see? Odd little sort of greenish, yellowish coloration above. The bill I can see is really rounded on the culmen, even in this weird angle. And it's got a pale area below the eye. So we've got two Cassins and a pine grosbeak. All right, so we'll switch here to this ground feeding station. And again, we've got a bigger bird with this kind of distinctive pattern of yellowish on the head and that pale crescent. So we think that's a pine grosbeak again, right? A couple other birds are not as big as the pine grosbeak, little. One real streak, the other not. One looks different from anything else we've been talking about tonight. So we know this left-hand bird here we can recognize as a junco with its gray-headed look. It's indeed the gray-headed junco. And the one in the middle, though, little eye arc action, nicely marked underneath, our Cassin's finch. All right, so we've got one more feeder here, 3 birds going on. We got some squabbling from the big bird on the foreground right, and that one's easy. I don't need to go too far. We can see it's bigger than the one behind, which is right away going to take us away from the little finches, and we know that's a pine grosbeak, right? And then the one behind, though, we can see it has this cresty look, and it's kind of pink up there and not pink back here. And we can see some faint streaking underneath, but not much streaking action and kind of a pink wash. So we know that's the Cassin's finch. And who's flying in down here on the left? Well, we see pink, so that takes us to a Rosy-Finch, silvery underwings. And I would say that with the extensive wash of pink underneath and the lack of gray prominent on the crown and the kind of brownish colored head that we have our friend, the brown cap Rosy-Finch, flying into the feeder. All right, so we popped the eBird filter. We reported a lot, and so now we got to double check our estimate, make sure that it's okay. And indeed, we do estimate these birds. So how many do you think we have here? You know, you can always count by tens, kind of get an estimate of 10 and extrapolate that across. And I'm going to do that right now. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 10, 20, 30, got a little higher there. I don't know. I think about 120, maybe a little bit more. Here's another sort of a setting here. What do you think? Could do the same kind of thing. Rough estimates, but we'll just kind of go with a really rough call here. And up 52. Well, we can't really go with 52, so let's round it off to 50 for our eBird report. Last one here. We're not looking at Rosy-Finches now. We're looking up in the tree. And we can see that there's some birds showing. If we look carefully, how many do you see? Some are red and some are yellowish. We've got some red crossbill males and some females. So there's 4 males and 2 females in this image. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. All right. So final exam, Mountain Finch edition. Fill in the blanks here on the names of the parts of this bird. There we go. Supercilium, the line above, auricular brown patch, malar, the line below. Whoop. All right, so Colorado's own high country bird, the brown-capped Rosy-Finch. Do you remember where the first brown-capped Rosy-Finch nest was discovered? And extra credit by whom and when was it? Okay, so you either already knew this or you got a good memory, you took notes. Yeah, it was on Mount Bros, and it was good old FC Lincoln back there on July 11th, 1915. So whose distribution do you think this is? Okay, so what do we see here? We can see that it's a Western species. It's year-round in Colorado, and it doesn't range very far north, and it does range down into Mexico. So those facts rule out everything else we've been talking about tonight, except for one species, and that is that mountain finch par excellence, the Cassin's finch. So which Colorado mountain finch is that committed mountaineer, usually remaining at elevations above 9,500 feet? Okay, so let's see, Rosy-Finches are way up there, but they come down in the wintertime to much lower elevations. The one that tends to stay up high, pine grosbeak. All right, so our last question, What is the name of the finch family? And I don't want you to tell me finch family. I want you to give me the Latin name. All right, Fringillidae. All right, so how'd you do? Well, you'll have another chance next time around. I want to say thank you to the 18 photographers whose images were used in this presentation. The images are credited on each of the slide. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you all and making bird bombs be what it can be. And this beautiful image of rocks on the right is not just the beautiful image of Red Rock Park, but it also has some Rosy-Finches in it. Can you see them? How many Rosies can you spot? 6 are easy, 5 at least are not. And how many species of Rosy-Finch? Well, you can come back in the video and study. I'm going to give away the easy ones right now, starting with a black Rosy-Finch right there. You can see that distinctive blackish coloration, and you can tell it's not brown below the eye, and some other dots marking locations of easy to find gray crowns. But you can look for the hard ones on your own. All right, so bird bombs are available on our DFO website. You can look at all the videos of the past bird bombs there. Go to our programs page and go to past programs below the listing of current upcoming programs. We've got some upcoming bird bombs already lined up there on the page that you can register for. The next one is February 9th at 7 p.m. And it's called Where's That on the Bird? And we're going to be talking about being intelligent, about knowing the different parts of the bird and how it all comes together to inform our appreciation of what we see and our ability to identify birds. So that'll be a great one. So now I'm going to stop the screen share here and we'll see if we have any questions.
Hey, David, thanks. I can't wait to learn where the legs on a bird are.
Yeah, you know, these are the details we're going to go into.
For years about that. Oh, no, but that is a really exciting one because, you know, birders frequently throw out things like, oh, the supercilium or the malar or the like primaries or undertail coverts. And what are all those things? Yeah. If you do have Q&A questions for me, there's a Q&A function in Zoom, so pop your question in there. My first question for you is crossbills. Why the crossed bill? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, so they use that to actually pry. So they when they're getting seeds out of the cone, some of the cones are accessing are not fully open, and they can use their bill. One of the ways they use it is to actually manipulate the mandibles such that they can spread apart the scales of the cone to reach in with their tongue to pry out the seed. And so that's one of the principal reasons. So it's a little hard for me to explain right now how the crossing part works. Next time we're on a field trip, I'll do my special demonstration of that. But that's kind of what's going on with that bill, is so that they can extract the seed out of cones that aren't fully open. And don't ask me if they all cross left or right or anything, because I don't really know. I do know that in the southern hemisphere, the bills cross right, and in the northern hemisphere, they cross left.
All right. Well, I think that answers another question we had from Joanne asked, why are some crossbills to the left and then to the right? So,
you know, I don't have that right. I don't have that right in my bird bomb brain right now, but there's probably out there. I would turn to the Birds of the World account as one place to start.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Luke asks, in the Cornell frequency plots, what does the percent represent?
So it is the percent of all the complete checklists for the particular region and date span that you're considering. So sometimes the percents are pretty low, but they're still useful for looking at changes over the season. So if you want to get to the numbers, then you can skirt over to some of the other options on the graph there, such as abundance or average count. Those are two things that are presenting directly the numbers, but the frequency is a good one. One of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the eBird charts for these mountain finches is that they're a little unusual in some regards, and I think it's because these birds are so erratic. and also there can be so clumped in space. And so there can be high counts in one spot and there's none in another place. And those kind of things create some of those crazy spikes and peaks and create situations where things don't quite match up compared to some other species. So it takes a little deciphering there.
Yeah, awesome, cool. And then, of course, it's always interesting to hear, do we have any DFO field trips where we can go check out some of these finches? Obviously, some of them are down here this time of the year, but not all of them.
You know, we have two Rosy-Finch rambles coming up that I'm leading, one along with Gary Witt, and one's just this weekend, another coming up in about 10 days. And I think those might be both full. I know one is full, the other might have one space open. But if folks are interested, watch on the DFO page, because maybe another Rosy-Finch ramble will show up for the next coming few weeks or so. We'll go specifically to try to find some Rosy-Finches and other mountain finches. Right now, we have Cassin's finches down in the lowlands, and so those are things we can see on our trips, even if we're not heading up into the mountains. And there's some evening grosbeaks around, and so that's a possibility as well on some of our trips that are down in town.
Yeah, definitely. I know there's been a flock of evening grosbeaks at Walden Ponds up here in Boulder for months now.
Yeah, cool.
They're like right by the Sawhill parking lot. So
yeah, you know, they can be very regular in a particular spot like that, but you go somewhere else and you're like, I haven't seen a new grosbeak for months. So that's one of the cool things about these mountain finches, is you get to get excited when you do encounter them.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Laurel noted that she heard that there's no particular physical reason for whether the crossbill's bill crosses right over left or left over right. So
okay,
yeah, it's an interesting one. Why? It's kind of like left-handed versus right-handed. Maybe there's no real reason.
Left bill, right bill. Is it left beak, right beak? I don't know.